Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a wine from Hawke's Bay. This is Church Road's Gimblett Gravels Cabernet Sauvignon from 2021, and this is in their one range, single vineyard and single varietal wines. Church Road is quite a large winery within the Hawke's Bay and has a long history dating back to the 1890s. A very prominent figure in its development over the years was Tom McDonald, somebody who joined the winery at the age of 14 in 1921, was still actively involved in it at the time of his death in 1987. Donald was in charge of the winery for much of this time, both at one stage as owner and also as manager for McWilliams, the Australian wine company. And during this period, he was the pioneer of the first commercial production of Cabernet Sauvignon in the Hawke's Bay region. And the Cabernet Sauvignons he made in the 1950s and 60s are legendary. I guess it's fair to say they were some of the first reliably age-worthy wines being made anywhere in New Zealand. And thus, the winery has a range, their flagship range, which they started creating in 1995, that commemorates Tom McDonald. Initially that was a Cabernet Merlot, and it went on to include a Chardonnay and a Syrah in the range. Quite important to the quality of those wines is the selection of the very best wines made from the finest plots that Church Road have. And instrumental in creating those wines, therefore, is this range, the one range, which sort of illustrates the style and the character of the wine portions that go to make up the Tom McDonald, in this case Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot blend, consist of. So as I say, this is a Cabernet Sauvignon from the Gimblett Gravels region, and it's produced in the same way as the wines that go into the flagship Tom range, but has been chosen more for its typicity of Gimblett Gravels style and its Cabernet Sauvignon characteristics than for its ability to fit into the blend of the top wine, which is a Cabernet Merlot. The attention to detail used in creating this, however, is very much the same. 2021 was a hot, dry vintage, not quite as hot as the preceding 2020 vintage, but there were drought conditions through most of the growing season. This resulted in very clean fruit. There was no rot pressure at all. However, it did mean that irrigation had to be managed very carefully to ensure there was enough water for the vines to continue to operate, but the addition of water didn't create too much vigour and too much vegetative growth as a result. The Gimblett Gravels is a region with alluvial gravel soils that are very low in moisture content, very low in nutrients, and thus very devigorating soils. So they tend to give a very concentrated style of fruit that's rich and dark and has a good depth. The region is only about 40 metres above sea level, but it's sufficiently far inland that it's beyond the reach of the cooling breezes coming off the sea. Very careful attention was paid to the vines in the vineyard to try and make sure that balanced fruit was grown. First of all, you had shoot thinning, then bunch and fruit thinning. The canopy was trimmed regularly to ensure that there wasn't too much leaf growth. There was declumping, and the intention was to try and arrange the bunches evenly along the row, helping to produce balanced fruit. And then as a final stage, the leaves were trimmed from the fruit zone, so all the fruit was very well exposed to the sunlight. There was no shading going on there at all, to ensure good, even ripening. Monitoring in the run-up to harvest was going on every 2 or 3 days, with the fruit being analysed to try and ensure that it was picked at a stage where there was still sufficient freshness and energy, and yet there was also power and density in the fruit. Picking was by hand, with very careful selection to remove any unripe or damaged fruit. At the winery, the bunches were destemmed, crushed. Fermentation started immediately by inoculating with yeasts. In tank, fermentation was allowed to head up to 34 degrees, which is relatively warm for fermentation, much higher than that, and you could actually shock the yeasts by allowing them to get too hot. But this ensured good extraction of colour and also of ripe tannin. After fermentation, the skins and pips continued to macerate in the wine, and this was allowed to go on until there'd been a period of 3 to 4 weeks of maceration, during which time a certain amount of aeration was encouraged to try and stabilise colour, to integrate tannins and to fix the aromas, to give lovely lifted aromas. The wine was drained off into French oak barrels. They were using 228 litre Burgundy barrels, evidently. 63% of the oak used for this wine was new, and the wine stayed in there for 19 months. The first thing it will have done will have completed its malolactic conversion, which may or may not have started in tank. For the first 8 months in barrel, the wine stayed with its lees, the solids left off after fermentation, just to help feed and give richness to the texture of the wine. The wine was then racked and stayed in barrel for a further 11 months. The racking was the last piece of clarification done to the wine. There was no fining and no filtration, and it was bottled without being cold stabilised. So hopefully all the beautiful aromas and flavours should have made their way into the bottle without any interference. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? It's beautiful, deep, dark, purple red, almost opaque. I can just about see the stem of the glass as I look down through there. It's staining the glass as I swirl it, and the wine at 14% alcohol clearly has good viscosity. We'll have plenty of tannins as well. Let's see what the aromas are like. The aromas are relatively restrained. There is a sort of a lifted black currant and black cherry. It's quite sort of juicy fruit. But there are underlying cedary notes that are stopping it from being too ebullient. Tasting that, the first thing you see is beautiful acidity. That's lovely and fresh. There's a sort of a leafy cassis note on the front palate. I mean, it's completely dry. There are very fine tannins, really quite grainy tannins, and the fruit has a sort of a concentrated dark cherry to dark plum. There's a damson note in there. There's some real concentration, but that concentration is being lifted beautifully by the lovely acidity. The wine is medium to full-bodied. It's very concentrated, very structured. That structure is incredibly fine, but and this is in contrast to the Tom, in which this kind of wine may be one of the blending elements. And the Tom was much more rounded because the Merlot element in that had rounded it out and given it more sort of richness. This is a much more linear style of wine. It has a long, clean, fresh flavour heading towards blackcurrant lozenge. There are notes of leafy cassis. There are perhaps notes of tobacco leaf, that sort of slightly savoury note in there as well. There's perhaps a slight cedary sweet spice as well. And actually, the tannins are closing up the finish a little. The alcohol at 14% seems to be just giving roundness. It's not completely closing the fruit. But there is a tight, tannic note of black plum damson on the finish. It's coming up a little short. I mean, to be fair, this is a very young wine. As a 2021, I wouldn't really expect to be drinking this for another 4 or 5 years. Given its good acidity, its lovely concentration and its fine tannins, I think you'd very happily age that for 10 years or more. As I say, this is a wine that's made with a view to it perhaps going into Church Road Tom wines, which are significantly more expensive. And as a result, although it may not quite have the completeness in terms of the blend that the Tom achieves, it's a very high quality wine, and you can really see that in its intensity, its beautifully handled structure. It has a very fine nature, and I think will be very enjoyable with time. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've found the video of use, of interest. If you have enjoyed it, do please press the like button. That would be great. Do please share it with your friends. That would be wonderful. Think about signing up and following us on YouTube. It would be great to see you join us for another tasting again very soon. Do also please leave any comments you have in the box below. It would be great to hear what you think both about the wines and about the tasting. So anyway, I hope we'll see you again in the near future. Bye for now.